are important partners in policymaking, helping to elevate and advocate for legislation and administrative proposals. By supporting the extensive work of AEI scholars in areas including foreign defense policy, education, the reform of key institutions, the economy, the Constitution, and poverty alleviation, Mr. Doar has helped to solidify and elevate AEI's position as a leading voice on major issues facing the United States. Before becoming president of AEI, Mr. Doar led the Institute's Opportunity and Mobility Studies program and served as a lead member of the AEI Brookings Working Group on Poverty and Opportunity. Prior to his work at AEI, he served as commissioner of the New York State Office of Temporary and Disability Assistance under Governor George Pataki, and as commissioner of the New York City Human Resources Administration under Mayor Michael Bloomberg. My special thanks to Robert Doar for being with us to share his insights, and to Princeton SPIA's Lauren Wright, an associate research scholar and lecturer in politics and public affairs, for serving as moderator. I very much am looking forward to this conversation. Lauren, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Amani. Thank you, Robert. We really are so happy to have you here. Let's start on these issues of poverty alleviation, the social safety net, economic mobility, because as Amani mentioned, you have an extensive record on those issues, and they're really important to our students too. That's something we think about a lot here. What is the proper role of the federal government in poverty alleviation? What's the current state of the art thinking about what works and what doesn't? And are Republicans poised to do the things that work, in your opinion?
Well, first, thank you for having me. It's great to be here. I have been at SPIA many times when I worked for Mayor Bloomberg in the city, and when I worked for Governor Pataki at the state. I often came here to recruit SPIA students, and they were outstanding public servants for me, both at the state level and the city level. And at AEI, we attract many people from Princeton, both undergraduate and graduate program, to participate both as people that work at AEI and also engage with us in a variety of ways. So I really feel that there's a partnership here and a friendship here, which I hope that we can build on even further in the future. So my view is that the key ingredient to assisting people who struggle in America is employment. And if we can structure our safety net programs, whether it's the TANF program or Medicaid or food stamps or public housing or refundable tax credits, in a way that provides incentives to people to get into work and engage with the benefits of work, both in terms of income and in training and in development of skills, and you supplement those the earnings with various forms of assistance that, as President Clinton used to say, make work pay, you can really make real progress. And we have made very significant progress in reducing poverty in the United States, properly measured. But it's a combination of employment and assistance, work requirements sometimes, and work supports. And to the extent that the federal government policies are structured so that they're enforcing and incentivizing that kind of behavior, we will make progress. If, on the other hand, we provide aid without any conditionality with regard to employment, I think we're actually harming families. And so that is the terrain of the debate now. I've been involved in this for a long time, and in the past, leaders of the Democratic Party were more in alignment with the view that I just described. Work plus work supports leads to less poverty. Currently, or at least for the last 5 or 6 years since I've been at AEI, there's been a real strong emphasis on aid alone, or aid as an entitlement, or aid as a right, regardless of work. And that, I think, is also not only not the right policy to help individuals, it's also not popular. So there have been some, the big dispute in the last 3 or 4 years has been on the refundable child tax credit. And now we're getting into real depth here, but it is in the newspapers quite a lot. And the divide there is, do we provide those refundable tax credits to households where there is no employment? Or do we say there needs to be at least some employment, some earnings that will lead to the additional support? And the breakdown on that is Republicans and one Democrat, Senator Manchin, insist on a work conditionality, and Democrats did not. Thankfully, Senator Manchin was successful in preventing that from becoming permanent policy. So it lost. It's going to come up again. And this divide, this discussion about is what motivates the public discussion at the federal level a lot right now. There are a lot of other issues involved, but that's the one that I think is most important. The only other one I would mention is that Republicans are more inclined to support policies that promote the benefits of two active and involved parents involved in children's lives from day one for the long haul. That has shown, Sarah McClanahan, a really wonderful Princeton professor who I knew very well, made it very clear that that has shown that children raised in households with two active and involved parents do better. And we shouldn't be afraid to say that in an effort to promote behavior that leads to better outcomes for children. Here, I think there's a broad agreement on that, partly due to Sarah's work. I know just participated along with scholars at Brookings and other think tanks on a report that was about the state of the nation. And the scholars all seem to agree that one thing we should watch in the United States is the extent to which children are raised in single parent households. And the more that that is taking place, that's something we should be working to try to fix. And you can fix it in two ways. One, promote more marriage and more engagement with two parents. And the other is just recognize that households with they're raised by a single parent need additional help. And I've done both of those.
There's a divide. My students and I were just talking about this last night about the child tax credit within the Republican Party. Josh Hawley, for instance, is very supportive, has voted for it. Other Republicans want those work conditions, want other conditions. How do you see that shaping up as the Trump administration gets going here?
Well, it's a little vague. Senator Hawley and Senator Vance have not always been clear about whether they insist on a work conditionality in the child tax credit. But other Republicans have been very clear that they are going to insist on it. And so while again, what those Republicans are anxious to do mostly is increase the resources in households that are lower middle class and middle class and are raising children. They want families to be more comfortable, to have more children and to have children. And I see that. It's not the area I particularly focus on in my life. I've always focused on people at the very bottom, but that's what they want. And they may have been willing to say, okay, we'll let more money go to households where there's no work if we can get this additional tax refund for our family or the families they care about. That's going to play out in the tax bill now. The only problem for them is that the federal government is broke. And we have a very aggressive OMB director who's on my side of the issue. And so to the extent that additional refundable tax credits for families are wanted by Republicans, they're going to have to pay for them. Or they're going to have to come up with the money. And the federal government is concerned about debt and deficit too. So I feel that my general view is that refundable tax credits that go to households with zero income and no work are not going to be a viable option in public policy until Democrats reclaim the White House or take back the House.
Let's move on to AEI a little bit. You said something interesting when we were talking the other day about how AEI gets the rep that it's the old Republicans, I think you said, or the traditional Republicans. But you said we're not really. And I want you to talk a little bit more about that. What did you mean by that?
Right now, if you haven't noticed, there's a sort of loyalty test very intensely applied for people on the right with the Trump administration. And that's a test that AEI would fail because our scholars are independent and they're free and they call them as they see them. They may be conservative, they may be right of center. And so that means that sometimes they're writing things that are very supportive of what President Trump is doing, and sometimes they're writing things that are very critical. And that's great. That's the way we like it. It's earning the support and friendship of our friends around the country. And we also are continuing to be influential. We have friends in the administration. They're reading our material. They're listening to us. we're in every, major publication in the country every day. So they have to deal with us whether they like it or not. And I'm happy about that. On the old traditional one, I want to say a little caution on that. AEI's view of conservative policy and Republican policy was associated with 4 issues that I think we've had to adjust and learn. And one of them is immigration. AEI has traditionally been supporters of the free flow of goods and services and labor around the world. We love immigrants, I do. But I think that traditional sort of openness and libertarian attitude was tone deaf to some of the complications and problems that come with our immigration policy in the United States in the last 5 or 10 years, in which people were coming in an unauthorized way, the rule of law seemed to be violated, excessive pressure was put on social services providers, including in my city under Mayor Adams in New York City and in every city in the country. And there seemed to be something broken. And that's not even bringing into the issues concerning crime or the impact on the labor market. And I think at AEI, we recognize that maybe this hard ideological commitment to the free flow of goods and services and labor maybe deserved a little rethinking. So we've been engaged in that. Trade is another one. We're free traders. You're going to see a lot from AEI that's very critical of the Trump administration's tariff policies, as we would be of the Biden administration tariff policies. But I think we had to recognize that the impact of China and their amazing ability to produce goods that flood markets and the way in which they behave as a trade partner needed to be addressed. And I think we've had scholarship that's adjusted to that. On engagement around the world, we were maybe deservedly in the past associated with the George W. Bush administration's foreign policy, but that didn't go so well. And I think we learned some lessons there. And IAI scholarship, our new leader of the foreign and defense team, Corey Shockey, and Zach Cooper, who's here at Princeton, they have a more, I think, a more nuanced and wise view of the world. It's not sort of traditional Republicans. The one where we probably sort of stayed pretty strongly where we are is our commitment to a belief that we've made commitments in our retirement and health programs that are beyond what we can afford. And we really do need to do something about them or we're going to run out of money. And so there we plead guilty to pretty much being, the green eye shade Republicans that are looking to get our fiscal house in order. But AI's, because of we don't have a one voice policy, all of our scholars are free and independent to take whatever positions they want. It's hard to characterize us. Sometimes I get up in the morning and I don't agree with a couple things that we're putting out. And sometimes I get up in the morning and scholars don't agree with each other. We have people from the left, Rui Teixeira, quite famously left CAP to come to AEI because he wanted to point out the many ways the Democratic progressive leadership had lost touch with the working class Americans. And he was uncomfortable, or CAP made him to feel uncomfortable. And so he came to a place where his work is celebrated and promoted. And so it's hard to characterize our work with, broad strokes, but I've tried to give you some sense on a variety of issues where we stand.
I'd like to drill down on this a little bit because I think it's a question a lot of research institutions are facing right now. How can you be values-driven, belief-driven, which AEI is very clear-eyed about, and do objective, cutting-edge research? Is there ever a tension there? How do you balance it?
Well, I think that's a good question. I think others have struggled with this differently than I. We have certain values about the role of government in Americans' life, about the proper size and scope, about treating people as individuals and not as representatives of a particular race. And that does inform us. We are nonpartisan, but we're not non-ideological. We have a general perspective that is right of center. But within that perspective, you can still pursue research and let the facts fall out as they may be, and you have to be willing to let those facts contradict your priors or your preconceptions. And I think we support and encourage that. But we do have a perspective. I think other think tanks, are more explicitly of particular value. I great admire Bob Greenstein at the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, but they had a perspective. CAP has a perspective, and I think that you're right. That does complicate some of their approach. Brookings has tried very hard under the former dean. CC is a great friend of mine, and we do lots of things together. They're in my judgment trying very hard to be center or nonpartisan, but on the other hand, they've also made some commitments to certain views in the way they operate that make them look more left. And I don't think they quite know whether they are willing to accept that and go with it, or whether they want to try to be totally non-ideological. I think it's a struggle. What I've learned at AI, which I didn't know, is that there's no rule. You get to be the think tank you want to be, so long as you comply with the tax rules concerning nonpartisan activity in political campaigns. And I love that because it allows me to adjust and guide our institution in a way that I think is best for our country.
What is some of the most exciting research coming from your scholars right now that you look to in particular?
Well, that's a good question.
Yeah.
There's a
I could
lot.
say what my favorite is, but I want to know. I want to know what yours.
Yuval Levin is the head of social culture and constitutional studies. He wrote a piece just this week on how to evaluate the president's behavior as he takes over the executive branch. And Jack Goldsmith, a Harvard Law School professor, I really recommend Jack Goldsmith to all of you. He is an AEI scholar. We're very proud of having him on our team. He's writing a lot about how to evaluate these challenges. And I think that I would say that there's a complexity to that particular question about what a president rightfully is allowed to do in running the executive branch. Article 2 of the Constitution is pretty clear. He has a lot of power. He was elected to run the executive branch versus his powers with regard to the rest of government and things that are outside of the executive branch. And I think as we evaluate, and as AI scholars, Jack and Yuval and Phil Wallach, who wrote a great book called Why Congress, as we evaluate Adam White, who's also a constitutional law scholar, as we struggle with that issue, I think we just need to know, in my judgment, that they're complicated. They're going to take an effort to marshal the facts and make the case and play it out in our constitutional system in a way that is thorough and careful and will take time. And I think that we will be people that are saying, you can't rush to judgment on the third day or the third week or the fifth week and cry constitutional crisis and abuse of power until you really have made your case. And I say that just a little bit of personal reflection. My dad was involved in the civil rights movement. My dad was involved in the impeachment inquiry into President Nixon. Those things were worked out through our constitutional process over a period of time and involved an elaborate and extensive deliberation and fact gathering. And they weren't resolved because someone said, gee whiz, this looks like it's wrong. And I just want us to we're going to be on the side of counseling patience and care and working out. So that's one area. We have a great scholar, Dan Cox, who's writing about, he wrote a piece called The Recession, the Relationship Recession, and it talks about college kids and young men and women and how they're becoming friends with each other. It was heartbreaking. I don't want to say anything I really shouldn't say, but I had a wonderful time at Princeton as a student, getting to know people in my social life. And it doesn't seem as happy now, and I've noticed it in my own children. And that's troubling. Something going on. I don't know what it is. Dan Cox is writing about it a lot. He's the most quoted scholar at AI now. We do a lot on foreign and defense policy. We're very aggressive on promoting the right kind of national defense and big investments in the national defense. We were very instrumental, I think, in persuading Speaker Johnson to ultimately pass the Ukraine-Israel-Taiwan aid bill at the end of the Biden administration. And we're very active in trying to persuade the Trump administration to support Ukraine. We're very worried about that. It's really nip and tuck, and it could go either way, and it'll be a tragedy if Putin is in Kiev by the end of the year. It'll be Trump's Afghanistan. That's what we want to make sure he knows, so he doesn't do it. So there are a lot of issues. You know, we put out, as I say, 15 or 20 things a day. Foreign and defense, domestic policy. We do think that on social policy, we should shift from poverty alleviation to upward mobility.
Mhm.
We need to spend more time on skills. Oh, and just for those Princetonian administrators, we are very concerned about viewpoint diversity in higher education, the lack of a curriculum in our major institutions that at least give some attention to the achievements of the United States and our accomplishments, the lack of a sense of sometimes free speech on campuses, rise of anti-Semitism. So we are big supporters of creation of these new schools of civic thought that allow a university like University of North Carolina or Texas or Florida to start a new school that allows them to attract professors that aren't sort of in line with what we think is a pretty progressive orthodoxy in the academy. So we're very active in that. I just met with some administrators here at Princeton who are concerned about the interest in the endowment tax and sort of anti-higher education sort of attitude of the Trump administration, the Republicans. My view is they should be concerned. They should be concerned, and in order to address their concerns, they should acknowledge areas where they can get better and where they can be better stewards of dollars and also allow for a liberal education the way we expected it to occur. So those are some things wrong.
A lot of different,
A lot there.
there.
It's very hard for me because there's some people here who know me very well, and they didn't think I was an expert in anything.
Oh, I'm sure that's not true.
That's definitely true. And I have to sometimes pretend that I'm an expert in a lot of things, and I'm not. I am basically, you know, I'm an administrator. When I went to AEI, I wasn't a scholar, I wasn't a public intellectual. I was a former public official who wanted to apply what I had learned in running the SNAP program and the Medicaid program in New York City, New York State, to the public policy discussion. And so I did that, and I could write, and I could testify, and I could write an 800-word op-ed and participate in a research effort. But then when my predecessor left, I missed managing. And I got worried that in this really difficult time in America, especially with the rise of national populism and the aspects of the Trump approach that is concerning, that AEI would lose its way. And so I raised my hand, and they picked me. What I didn't know, Dean, is that managing academics is really hard. So it's different than managing. I was telling the dean earlier, or maybe someone else, you know, when I managed the 14,000 public sector employees in the bureaucracy of New York City Social Services, they were all Democrats. They were all mostly Black and Hispanic, mostly women. But this is something I really admired about them. They understood that when Mayor Bloomberg won the election and I became the commissioner, that I had a view of sort of the commissioner's dead, long live the commissioner. You know, the new guy's in. We got to implement the policies that this new team wants because they won the election. And I thought that would surprise me because I was sort of plagued by your typical Republican prejudices against big city bureaucrats. That is an issue that's playing out in Washington now too. And anyway.
Well, I'd like to hear more about that. I'll make myself a note. Can you walk the students through the mechanics of how a think tank like AEI shapes policy?
Sure.
In the Trump administration, for instance, you mentioned the Ukraine issue.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Go ahead.
So we have a lot of scholars. They have the resources of a research assistant. They have the freedom to write and think what they want. They are hired at pretty high level of respect and prestige in their field. They do know how to be a self-starter and get work done. They produce the work, whether it's a research paper, a book, an op-ed, a testimony before a congressional committee. Then we have a media team and a government relations team that promotes that work. And we have an effort to promote that in all kinds of ways. We do all the things you do in social media to promote it. And then we also, with the government relations team, we have kind of Sherpas that know all the key members of House, know the staffers, and develop relationships with the executive branch or the governors. And we take that work to them. These guys men and women are so wrapped up in politics and in running for office and raising money. They don't really have the time or the interest in doing this more in-depth work. We blast them. We're not afraid to be aggressive in the public dialogue, and that has influence. It's not that complicated. The public policy in America gets made by a cacophony of voices, and we just want to be one of those voices that is as prevalent and as outspoken as possible. And so that's how it works. When I became president, there was some concern. You can either be a little boutique shop that does a few things and big ideas, and you're sort of out of it. Or you could get broader and deeper and be in it every day. And I chose the second option. And so, we're up to 300 people and 115 or 120 scholars. And we are getting in. That's I hope, does that answer your question?
No, that's great.
Does.
Do you perceive any difference between the Biden and the Trump administration in openness to the input of your scholars? You mentioned a couple times there's been some challenges. I'd like to hear more about that.
I would say no. I don't. I mean, I'd be careful about this because the Biden administration wasn't all that open to some of our work. I will just tell you. I'm great friends of another graduate of Princeton, Bruce Reed, one of the great public servants of the last 50 years. But he wasn't paying that much attention to us. I don't know. They have to read it because it's there every day, and so they can't ignore it. The question is what people get all obsessed about, and I get this because sometimes there are people who want jobs, is are you buddy? Are you best friends? Are you rubbing elbows? Are you going to the parties? I think that's all a little bit exaggerated. They got to deal with. I mean, when I worked for Mike Bloomberg, and this is a very sophisticated guy with very sophisticated people around him, some Manhattan Institute person wrote a piece in the Journal or the Times, and he was very critical of his work. He paid attention to it. They didn't like that. So we get in the debate, and we feed, and we also do. I should just point out we do give a platform for politicians to come and speak.
Okay.
So they're with us a lot, and we see them a lot. As I say, I went to see Speaker Johnson before he was Speaker. He was actually pretty anonymous young congressman, and he was the head of the Republican Study Committee. And we went to see him, and I was briefing him on the issues I care about, and he was listening. And he said, "Robert, I got to go. I got to run back to Louisiana. I got to run back to my district." This was when the first term of President Trump. President Trump is coming to my district because there was a terrible storm, a terrible flood in Louisiana, and I've got to be there to greet him. And I said, "Oh, that's just like that great song, Louisiana 1927." Which is, all of you, of course, know is a great Randy Daniels song. And he started to sing it. And then he looked at me and he said, "How does this Yankee know that song?" So we developed friendships. Mm-hmm. No one got that joke. You guys come on. What's the matter with you?
Well, they're fascinated.
Yeah.
I want to go back to the question of executive overreach or not.
Yeah.
And things you and your scholars feel the Trump administration is doing well, and when do you get concerned? When is the point at which you say it's too much, too fast? Is there any particular policy area?
Well, there's a lot there, and
Yeah.
and our scholars are different. I'll tell you in the area that I know a little bit about, just to give you an example.
Sure.
The Center on Medicaid and Medicare is a major entity in the federal government, and it disperses huge amounts of money. And it is actually where, if you really look at our deficit and debt problem, all the solutions could occur. It's where our biggest cost problems are. The idea that the Trump administration people, whether led by Elon Musk or anybody else, want to take a look at that and study that and understand that. There's nothing wrong with that. They were elected. They won the election. Then they should. The idea, for instance, I'm reading in the newspaper today that, Elon Musk is saying, without any evidence, he says there's fraud in the CMS, disbursement of funds. People have known, who have studied this for 25 years, that there's fraud in Medicaid and Medicare. I got news for you. It happens every day. The claim system for those two programs was set up to pay rapidly, to pay the healthcare providers who submit claims as fast as possible. If you're going to pay all of that money that fast without any real review, you know what's going to happen? Some people are going to try to rip you off. There's a U.S. Attorney's Task Force that's worked on this for years. There's an HHS task force that worked on it here. They write a report every 6 months of the billions of dollars they found. So the idea that Elon Musk is paying particular attention to this and looking at it and asserting the power of the executive branch to review it, I'm not troubled by that. Before we know, if money is flowing out of there into their back pockets, and you have evidence of that, then we can talk about it. But so that's one that I think has been exaggerated. The Wall Street Journal wrote an editorial the other day, I think maybe it was either today or yesterday, saying that Senator Schumer showed up at the Treasury Department, protesting, sort of defending the bureaucrats against the influence of the officials who represent the president, who was elected in a fairly decisive election. I don't think that's really the best way for the Democrats to reclaim the American people's support. So there, I do feel the one that's more troubling and significant, and the thing to watch very carefully is what's happening in the Justice Department and what's happening in the FBI. There I have some concerns. Danielle Sassoon, who is the 33-year-old acting United States Attorney in New York. She's a friend of AEI. She's spoken with us. She was the prosecutor on the Sam Bankman-Fried case. She's absolutely spectacular. She's one of the great young lawyers in America. She's great lawyers, period. She's found herself now as the lead prosecutor in New York in the Southern District. And she got very publicly called down to Washington to consult on the Adams case, the Mayor Adams case. They have an ongoing investigation. They think they have something there. They want to pursue it. And she's been directed by Home Justice to stop. And that's unusual. That's a little troubling, and that's something we should watch. Whether the Justice Department has the authority to do that is one thing. Whether the Justice Department should do it is another. And I think, so that's an area that I'm a little concerned about. I also think that, those are two. And the FBI is concerning to me. But the number one thing I'm most worried about is foreign policy. I think President Trump is a little bit rope-a-doping on Ukraine, and we could easily wake up and it's over and it's not good for Zelensky. I think on China, the extent to which Elon Musk's he runs a Chinese automobile company. He's very close to Xi and all of those people. I don't think that's healthy. Good. I think if you look at our AI scholars, we'll have some issues on a lot of issues, but The foreign and defense policy ones are the most significant, and the FBI.
You mentioned protesting some of the cuts, or at least an investigation into whether and where we should cut is not a good way for Democrats to gain back public trust. What do you think Democrats should do to gain back
So
public
we
trust?
have Rui Teixeira writes this Substack called Liberal Patriot. He now writes for the Free Press for Barry Weiss. He wrote a book called Where All the Democrats Gone. It's a pretty, extensive list of advice, and he sometimes he says it much more dramatically than I do, but he basically says they've got to give up the crazy woke stuff. They got to give up they got to give up the obsession about race preferences. They got to give up the obsession about, the opposition to a policy that says that biological men should not play in sports. I did an event with him during the campaign, and I was trying to goad some effective efforts on the Harris campaign team. And I said, do you think, maybe the vice president could do an event and be kind of and she'd just be saying, well, I like women's sports, and I'm not sure that biological men should play in women's sports. Women's sports is different and causes some issues with regard to safety, your larger bodies, just something. It sort of was a standing up for women's sports and against the introduction of biological men into their sports. And he said they'll never do it. She'll never do it.
This was a campaign staffer.
So I was talking to Rui about,
Okay.
what, do you think they could do
Okay.
that? And he said no. And so I think that's one. The other is patriotism. Rui's one of Rui's great findings is that if you ask Hispanic Americans, is the United States the greatest country on the face of the earth? 75% of them say yes. If you ask self-identified progressive Democrats, who, by the way, run the Democratic Party, only 25% of them say yes. So, a little bit of, faith and respect for patriotism.
So you think it's the social issues
I do.
and not the economic?
Yes, I
issues?
absolutely believe that. And I also think that that's why Trump won. And I fight this with the Republicans. Trump won because of these cultural issues and this sort of alienation of working class Americans with these sort of elite cultural values on a variety of these issues. They played on it. That's why he goes to all the football games. That's why he does all the men's stuff. It's just really, that's why they won. But some Republicans, these national populists and these industrial policy types, they think they won because Trump's really going to impose tariffs and bring back the industrial base in the Midwest, and people are really upset about grievance, and I think if they put those policies in place, they're going to harm the economy, and they're going to harm the very people they're trying to help badly. And I think there are some people around Trump that know that. And so, yes, I definitely think that it's those cultural issues that played a bigger role in this terminating the election.
Although Democrats have been saying those things well before 2020. I mean, they started it after Trump got elected. They won in 2020. That would be the counterpoint.
There's a little, there's a little bit of a funny issue going on, which I think is people that love democracy should pay attention to. And this has changed. Higher turnout elections, which is when the president's on the ballot, favor Republicans. So, there's democracy for you. And so, yes, in a midterm election, lower turnout, those issues don't come in play. And Democrats will win. But I think in this particular election, these cultural issues really played a big role. And I should also say one other, and this is trust in institutions. So COVID
Yes.
was not the greatest. People weren't happy with that. I've got to really upset the Princetonians here with the remark I'm about to make, but the American people looked at the President of the United States and said, there's something wrong. He is not on his game. And the Democrats said, oh, no. What, are you kidding? That's ridiculous. And and then when it turns out, well, actually they were right. And then you say, well, we're gonna rig this and we're just gonna give this to the vice president, no contest. That makes people a little upset. I don't think you're being straight with them. I don't want to get everybody upset, but I was walking around campus and for the first time, I hadn't been here in a long time, I saw the new art gallery. And I took a picture of it and I sent it to my Princetonian family members and said, you want to see why it's possible that regular Americans might think elites in fancy universities do stupid things? Look at this building. And so I do think that everyone knows this, there's a disconnect between the American people and elites in powerful positions, and they're not very trusting.
Well, there's a major mistrust of experts of all kinds right now.
AI scholars.
Right. Well, I mean, social scientists,
Yes.
and
No, I
that's
agree.
even lower, the trust levels, than science as a whole. So how do we come back from that?
You just got to do the work and do it right and be honest. I mean, I had an encounter with Senator Bennett and back when now we're going back to the child tax credit. The child tax credit was in place.
Yeah.
And I went to see Senator Bennett. Senator Bennett is a very prominent member of the Democratic caucus. And I was speaking to him and I said, well, Senator Bennett, the only problem is it discourages work. Labor force participation among the recipients of the child tax credit for those who aren't working goes down. And he said, oh, no, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. And I said, well, yes, it does. And so there's a little bit of dispute on this. It's tiny, but every expert, when they really look at the data, acknowledges that if you provide cash without any conditionality for work, the incentive to work will go down and labor force participation will go down. So that's an area where I think you got to let the facts stand and not let your prior determine what you're going to say about the facts. And but you're right. In the world I operate in, there's a lot of, and everybody does it, but there's a lot of sort of mushing with the words to get the outcome you want. And one scholar I think has been really good at avoiding this is, in some respects, not always, but I'm a great fan of Raj Chetty's work. And he's putting out stuff about work and connection to community that's very strong. And it's not classically left or classically right. It's just great.
I want to leave as much time as possible for student questions. Maybe we could leave the 15 minutes for that, if that's okay with you. Okay.
Are you ready to do that now?
Is that okay with you?
Yeah, I'm fine.
Okay, good.
Great.
I'm sure they have a lot to ask you.
Hi. Hi, thank you so much for coming here. It's really been great to learn today. My name is Preston. I'm a junior in the policy school. I'm from Brooklyn and I study New York City policy.
Good. Where did you go to high school?
Regis.
My daughter went to a wedding the other day and she said, and there was Regis people in the room, and she said that all my dad ever told me was marry a Regis boy.
Thank you. And anyone's listening, please take that to heart. Okay, so I'm also a huge Mayor Bloomberg fan, and I've studied a lot of your work at HRA.
Uh-oh.
And I have a question, two-part question. You tried to really advance a culture of encouraging work to receive benefits. First, that really wasn't popular in New York City. You received quite a lot of backlash. I mean, I was a kid, but looking back on this, I've learned a lot about it. And the second is, so I want to first know, I would like to hear your thoughts on how to really convince people of an unpopular policy is really better off everyone. And the second is, what is the role of local governments, especially with something like, Medicare comes from Albany and then great, Washington directed. What could local governments like the city of New York do to really implement their vision for a more efficient and better city economy?
So on the first question, which regard to our popular acceptance of work requirements and public assistance and greater efforts at fraud detection, I have to say that while there was criticism and there was backlash, I want to remind you that Mayor Giuliani won 2 terms, Mayor Bloomberg won 3. So we had 20 years of center-right leadership in New York. So we must have been doing something that people liked. And I think on welfare policy, they actually liked it a lot. So I'm not so sure that the broad populace wasn't pretty happy with instituting policies that reduced the cash assistance caseload from 1.1 million to 360,000, while also reducing child poverty and increasing labor force participation among single parents. So I think that was one element of our leadership that was pretty strong. In the de Blasio years, he didn't really undo a lot of it very quickly. It's being undone now for a variety of reasons. But I remember being in a room just sort of like this, except it was at a major public hospital in the Bronx, and very crowded. It was one of those town halls that we do with politicians when you're a member of his cabinet. And someone from the neighborhood said, well, what are you going to do for people that struggle? And Mayor Bloomberg turned to me and he said, Robert, and I said, and this was quoted in the paper, I said, if you work, we will help you. And everybody in the crowd, that was fair. Maybe they could accept that. And so I thought that you definitely have to go into situations where advocates and, people that Mayor Koch used to say are straight out of central casting come and yell at you and are very performative, and you have to have unpleasant city council hearings. But if you I think you have to always look beyond the loudest voices to the people, and then you take your agenda to the people when at election time, and if you win, that should give you some confidence to keep at it. So that's what I thought. I think the second question was about local government, and so the relationship in social services, at least, is federal, state, and local. All three play a role, some different roles in different places. We liked it in New York because the local had a big role. We actually delivered the services and met with the clients. We were seeing people every day. That's not always true in every state. What I say to people at AEI is if you want to really have an impact on public policy rapidly and get responsibility and authority quickly, go back to your city and state and work there. Because coming to Washington, especially on domestic policy, you're so far removed from the real action. And it's just a maw of people, congressional staffers. The competition takes a lot longer. You can have more authority and do more good in your community and then work your way back to Washington eventually. That's different in foreign and defense policy, but definitely true there. So, and I like a social safety net that does. The federal government has a role of providing. They're the biggest tax base. They can provide a lot of resources. The state government can have a role in sort of monitoring performance and training and sort of trying to get things to be uniform within the state. But what really happens is between the individual and the agency providing aid. And that's where you can really make a difference, in my opinion. But they all three play a role. Oh, one over there? Okay. Well, but this, I think they're. You're next. Well, I should be quiet. You do.
Hi. My name is Frances Steele, and I'm a Master's of Public Affairs student at SPIA. And I wanted to go back to what you were talking about your views on social safety net. And you were speaking about how Republicans tend to favor policies that benefit families with two parents who are involved. And I don't think it's pretty intuitive that two earners are good for economic stability of families. And I understand how that might be the ideal when you're designing social policy, but just trying to contend with the reality of the fact that, that is often not the structure, particularly as you say, you're interested in supporting families in the lowest income. Thinking about welfare reform from 96, we spend so much more money on the earned income tax credit since we transferred from AFDC and removed entitlements. And I'm kind of curious how you marry those two perspectives. Just understanding that our new system so often excludes those at the very bottom. If you can't work, if the amount of hours you are able to work is limited by the fact that you are a single parent, and what you think, given that perspective, how we create a system that allows people to have benefits they can depend upon, even without an entitlement system, if they don't have the access to work or economic stability that a two-parent household provides.
So to the first question, you are right. It's an ideal. It's something that I think we should have policy that provides incentives. I also think we should be honest about the implications of raising children by yourself without the presence of another parent. But you do have to deal with reality. That is not what's happening. And that's why I worked in the child support enforcement program, which helped to get income from the absent parent into the household and engage the absent parent in playing a role in the household, even though they're not there as a custodial parent. And so I've always been working on ways to mitigate and address the drawbacks that come with single parenthood. That's how I got in the business. So I acknowledge that needs to be done, as well as promoting an outcome for young people that would be a better way to order their lives. Get a job, graduate from high school, get married before you have children. I just want to be honest about that's what we should be promoting. And we did public relations campaigns along those lines. On the second issue, the earning of tax credit, you're right. We took TANF down, which was a cash entitlement, and we're spending, way less than we ever spent on that. And we greatly expanded the earned income tax credit. And that's what it is. It's an earned income tax credit. You get it in relation to whether you earn. You don't get it for not earning anything. You have to file a tax return that shows earnings, very low earnings, but some earning. And it goes up as you earn more. That is the incentives in the right way. It's encouraged work. It doesn't require to get the earning of tax credit full-time work. And so I think, and then the only question is, well, what if you have a situation where there isn't work? And that does happen. I was a supporter of some of the things we did to promote a lot of cash assistance during COVID because we shut the economy down. But in most places, there is some work. There has been for a long time. Right now, we're in a worker shortage. So I think you want to gearing your system toward a situation where there is the availability of work, and work should be encouraged and required as part of the relationship between the public sector providing aid and the person doing it. And the reason isn't only for the income, it's also for the engagement into the community, the meeting of people, the being out of the household. One of the things that I was most troubled by, the checks from Washington going into households without any work requirement, was that it was making people, often very vulnerable people, often people that have real challenges, stay in their homes with the curtains drawn and not come out and seek aid when they may need it. And that was very troubling to me because I believe in the local worker who's providing aid. I want them to be engaged with those families. So anyway, that's how I see it. And I think it's right now apparently hard for Democrats to give in on their belief in a cash entitlement, regardless of what people do. And I think it's causing them some popularity problems, some political problems. And I also don't think it's the right policy for families. Yes.
My question, when Trump/Musk stop purge federal government and closing department, where these people work? How it will make America great?
So the question is about President Trump's desire to close the Department of Education and close the Department of, I guess, the Foreign Aid Office. He's going after that very aggressively. My view about that is that he campaigns on an agenda that said not everything the federal government does is really helpful. And it's also costing us money. And, the Department of Education's track record on improving educational outcomes since it was created.
Why not to start?
Well, because he thinks that, well, he's going to go after the Defense Department too, I think. But so I just think that he has a very strong view that the federal bureaucracy is too big. And I think he's probably right.
We have one more student question up here.
Hey there. Thanks very much. I'm Ben. I'm a second-year master's student here. I'm curious if you see an opening for, like intellectual honesty across the aisle, even in the think tank space. Because one of the key takeaways from my graduate education here is that, like, oftentimes intuition about policy outcomes can be wrong. And I think the EITC is a great example of that. There's a paper from March 2023 by a scholar here, Henrik Klevin, that talks about the labor supply effects at the extensive margin of the EITC reform. And he finds that in no case, with the exception of 1993, is there a labor supply effect at the extensive margin, and that the 1993 increase in labor supply is actually confounded by welfare reform and the cycle of the macroeconomy. And so, that the takeaway from that is that, maybe it's not having the employment effect that people think it will. And I understand and completely concede the point that people respond to incentives. I think you can see that in the unemployment insurance during the pandemic, where you see, people not wanting to go back to work because what they get sitting at home is much higher than, what they would get trying to find work. So, Charlie Munger's got a famous point. He says, you tell me the incentives, I can tell you the outcome. And then you have things like tax reform, where there's bunching that's happening around there, and there's no third party reporting. And so I guess my question to you is, like, is there a room for this kind of data driven empirical approach to happen in a way that improves the efficiency of policy outcomes? And is AEI kind of like, do they have any working groups that look at things that they propose and follow up on how that policy is being rolled out?
So we did that. When I first came to AEI, I, along with scholars at Brookings and other places, started a working group on poverty opportunity and wrote a pretty good report on all of these issues, especially including the EITC. I think you're right that sometimes people want to say there's a silver bullet or one arrow that solved the problem. I always used to say on the labor force participation increase for never married mothers after welfare reform that there were three factors. There were the work requirements in welfare reform, there was the EITC, and there was the economy. And I think that if you're asking for sort of a more rational discussion, that I think a key place to start is recognizing that there are many factors at play in outcomes in our economy, and no one is the only answer. But in the game of rhetoric or the game of debate, you're fighting for your thing. You could try to make your answer the key thing. But the fact is, there are just so many factors in people's lives. But so I agree with that. We do try to call them as we see them and be empirical, and I think we're pretty good at it. And I think we're better sometimes when we do things in partnership, where we can resolve differences with others that come at it from a different perspective and agree on what we can agree on and leave the things aside that we can't. We've done a lot of that over the years. And I do think that while it doesn't get, the attention in the newspapers or the media on any given day, and certainly Donald Trump's not talking about it, underground in the day-to-day incremental work of the way public policy changes in America, it has an influence. And so, that's what I think. People do like to land on their favorite thing and make it the key thing. And there's never one reason. There's lots of reasons. I don't know if that was helpful.
Thank you so much for being here with us today,
Thank you for having me.
Robert.